You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Kinezic.
Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. Presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Kinezic, and I'm going to just have to say, roll tide, roll. This is episode 205, which is the area code for Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And this is our second start here, so Fran didn't like that I didn't know the...
No, we're going a little old school today. We're having some... There must be an eclipse because we're having every technical difficulty that is possible to have over the last day.
Could have been an earthquake.
Could have been an earthquake.
One of them too.
It's one of those, but we're kicking it old school, and we have our guest via phone today, and we're very excited about having this guest on the episode.
Yeah, Fran has really been hyping up this guest for a while, and I'm really excited to learn more about what he does.
Yeah.
And
it's a listener who we met through the podcast itself, and from there just having conversations and talking, and our guest is a member of the Facebook group, and started following him on social media and his social media presence. He has an incredible social media presence, and a great following, and puts out some incredible content. And it was only fitting to have this guest on the podcast to have it come full circle for us.
Definitely. So, Austin, why don't you give everyone a better introduction than I ever could and tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. Thanks so much, Tom, Fran. I'm happy to be here. My name's Austin Miller. I run Birdsong Landscapes, a restoration business here in Southwest Ohio. And I mostly focus on prairie seedings and lawn conversions, woodland management, invasive removals, and things like that. So I do listen to the podcast, and I'm passionate about trying to educate about this sort of stuff and get the word out to people. And you guys have done such a great job and been a good part of it. So happy to be here and join you all today.
Well, you have done a great job as well.
Mm-hmm.
And are you born and bred Ohio?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Southwest Ohio here. Born in Dayton, so yeah.
Okay. All right, very cool. So
and I would like to congratulate everyone in our room in this phone call, because we made it further than last time. This
We
is
did.
about as far as we made it before.
We're doing good here.
That's very true.
Oh, I had to say, too, go Buckeyes. We had to start this with Roll Tide.
Oh, I know.
Gosh,
It did hurt saying that.
Tom's brother actually went to the Ohio State, was a cross player there. So, Tom, that's very, really hurtful today.
Yeah.
Out of character, yeah.
It was just a coincidence. But so tell us, you kind of said what Birdsong Landscapes does. How long have you been in business, and what are some of the more interesting projects that you've been able to be involved with because of your company?
I've been in business about 5 years by myself now. I'm a one-man kind of show. Before I did work with another restoration company for a few years before that. One of the ones that I'm in the process of doing is a savanna restoration. So someone moved out of Cincinnati, moved up here to the more rural area, and bought 5 acres and built their home on it. So they've just got a barren, previous farm field. And so I was able to restore that with a grassland, as well as, I believe it was 50 different trees to make a savanna, an eventual savanna. So that's going to be a really exciting one to kind of watch and see it develop. So
that's very cool. That sounds like the kind of project I would like to see evolve, which I know those are some of the types of things you do. But in order to do a project like that, how was your knowledge of the historical sense of the part of the country that you're in? Did you do your research? Hey, what did this part of Ohio look like pre-colonization, and what am I restoring to? And how in depth is your background or not, I shouldn't say background, research into this when you take on a project like that?
Yeah, I'm very interested in kind of the landscapes prior to colonization and what was going on here. So, and I'm really into the history as well. So Ohio's got a rich history, and you can use the survey records from when it was being surveyed in the early 1800s to kind of see the trees that were present, or if there weren't trees present, you were in a prairie. So you can kind of use those to reconstruct at least what would have been going on and try to restore what should have been in place. It kind of reminds me of the article Tom had a few weeks ago, the prairie ecologist, was it, about the looking at the history and, you know, maybe kind of not being, you know, bogged down by that too much. And that is an interesting kind of thought, because you can maybe go, I don't know if I'd say too purist, but maybe you can get caught up in that too much. But on the other hand, I feel like we almost don't even know what has been lost. So it's just incredible to read these accounts of different types of plant communities and how large the trees were and so forth. And it's just an incredible thing. So you start digging into that, and it's really, really an amazing thing. One example that I think of and I always mention is down at the Scioto River in southern Ohio. There was a sycamore that was hollow on the inside, and they claimed that they could get 13 men on horseback inside of the hollow.
Wow.
So you got to think, like, this is like the largest trees, you know, east of the Rockies. I mean, that's where they grew, in the Ohio Valley. And so just incredible. Yeah.
When I think of the Ohio Valley, I think of Audubon's description of passenger pigeons and how there were so many in the trees, the sound was deafening. So obviously that landscape has changed probably pretty drastically since then, especially considering passenger pigeons are now extinct. But what do you think makes that part of the country special or unique?
I would say that's a great question. I would say that Ohio, especially in southern Ohio where I'm at, is a confluence of different regions, from the Appalachian, you know, foothills coming into southern Ohio, the glaciated north, which is all of Wisconsin and Iowa, and all of that kind of stretches into northern Ohio. And then you've got a diverse group of bogs and fens, different types of wetlands in Ohio. So, however, it probably was, you know, 200-300 years ago, it probably was much more diverse and more of a mosaic of different habitats. Whereas now we don't have the same ecological processes going on. Like you mentioned, the passenger pigeons would have created huge disturbances. Even elk and bison were here. So there was a lot of things that have changed for sure.
With the state of, you know, I have visited Ohio. I've obviously driven through Ohio. Like, is most of the open land agricultural land at this point? Is it private land? Like, is it possible to get back to some of these conditions, or is it really, like everywhere else, just an uphill battle?
I'd say an uphill battle. What I've really been struck by recently is the changes in hydrology. So if you really start thinking about it, and sometimes you'll see a farm field with standing water in it, but if you think about every ditch, every sewer line, all the components that go together to move this water more quickly to the creeks and the rivers and get it out of the way, it would have been so wet around here, and it would have been, I don't know how you could really reverse that to make it more of a, I don't know how you could get around that with the people living here. So in the way that we are. So, but, you know, restoration is still worthwhile, and there's some really amazing, I mean, it's amazing the resiliency of the communities, even despite the changes to the land and hydrology.
Yeah, you bring up a good point there, that we often forget about what we can't see, in a sense, and how much is happening underground. Like a lot of the farm fields where we are in New Jersey, and I'm sure across the country, have some kind of drainage underneath, so they're easier to farm in a sense. So even those things that we've seen for hundreds of years in some cases are not necessarily natural. I don't really know exactly how to put it. The other thing you brought up, and also having been to Ohio, a couple different places in Ohio, is how it's we're losing so much of that sense of place, because everywhere you go, it's like the same style buildings and it's the same stores, same fast food places. Maybe the gas stations have different names, but there's not a lot of variation. And when I was out in Utah a couple months ago, and we're driving down, I think it was 75 was the highway, and if it wasn't for the giant mountains that were what seemed like a few hundred feet away, but I'm sure it was a couple miles, you wouldn't have known that you were not in New Jersey. Like the storefronts were the same, or Ohio, or probably seemingly almost anywhere nowadays. Yeah. So yeah, just a couple of things that stuck out to me as you were speaking there.
I saw what it made me think of. This past winter, I was at a conference in Delaware Wetlands Conference, and our friend Matt Sarver gave a presentation on a project he was working in, and they were restoring agricultural fields, but where they were restoring, they just had the benefit of having aerial photos dating back 100 years, and they were able to see where there were ponds that no longer existed just by the discoloration of the soil. And they dug those exact spaces up because they knew they had reptile communities that couldn't, like the woods were separated by the ag ground, so they needed to reconnect it. So they dug up all the ponds and then put snags out so like salamanders could make it all the way from one side to the other. And they were saying like how quickly like the ponds filled back up with water, like how everything started thriving immediately. So it is, I always feel there's always hope. But when you mentioned bison, which if they no longer exist, you're never going to have the same kind of meadow diversity that maybe once was.
Absolutely. Yeah. But, maybe beaver could play that role. I mean, I kind of, early on learning about this, you love to hear about the bison and how they keep the prairie, but really beaver are just as influential as ecosystem engineers and have kind of similar effects. I mean, after the dam breaks, you get the beaver meadow and the very fertile soil, and succession starts again. And so that maybe could be our something that we can encourage nowadays.
I would love that.
As far as we can. Yeah.
I would love that. So from a customer standpoint, are you doing more residential, commercial, or is it a combo of both?
Mostly residential.
Okay.
Yeah, I try to get involved with local conservation organizations and do things on public property, because I really want people to be able to go to places and experience maybe some of the remnant habitats and things like that. But it is mostly residential properties that I've been working with.
So I guess in a roundabout way, how's business? Like, do you find that your average client is a little more knowledgeable and knows what they want? Like, are you seeing a shift in the jobs you're being asked to do?
I definitely see that it's a growing movement of people, and it's all these different avenues of promoting native plants, from the foragers, especially young people, and the foraging. That's really popular and wonderful. The black forager, on TikTok and stuff, she does wonderful. And this is a great way to kind of connect people to native plants. So that's one aspect. The gardening aspect certainly is you guys know, people are getting more educated and more into this stuff. So yeah, business is going well, and it's a lot of fun to do this stuff. It's so fulfilling. I actually used to used to work in a call center for a major bank, and it was just the most soul grinding work you could ever imagine. So I'm still, in almost that honeymoon of I'm outside all day. I get to, it's just a wonderful feeling. So, and then getting to restore this stuff back to what it maybe could have been. I was going to mention too, the aerial photos. Yeah. I'm really interested in the mounds and the earthworks that we have around here in Ohio, and they're still discovering them. They use the old aerial photos to find some of the earthworks that weren't totally plowed under in the 30s and 40s and so forth. So at a certain point, I realized, I should look at the woodland that I was interested in and see what it looked like in the 30s from this aerial photo.
Yeah.
So that's a really easy thing you can do and compare it to now. It normally goes through the 30s or the 50s all the way up to today. I think it's a site called historicaerialviewer.com. But if you just Google something like that, you could find it, and you could find whatever your favorite woodlot is, or a natural area. You could see how it looked years and years ago. Sometimes it's really, really surprising how it's changed. So
I have a friend who I was his first boss out of college, and he is at another nursery, and he started his own nursery. And he's one of the most knowledgeable people that I know when it comes to soils. And I had asked him, I was like, why? Like, why did you focus? And he goes, it wasn't that I meant to focus on it. He goes, I just realized at an early age how important soil was. And I knew I knew the course was going to be difficult, and I only had one shot at it. He's like, so I took it really seriously. And he goes, it's paid off dividends. Like, and he's really big on, like, before he works ground or buys ground, it's always, I need to look at the historical value of the soil and what was here and what its purpose was and what it did and what am I working with, which I don't think a lot of people put a lot of stock into, or not to the same depth. But, you're looking at these aerial photos with what was there and what it looked like. That's another aspect that I think sometimes gets overlooked, but we all know how important it is. I mean, we always talk about soil, but...
And if you think about back in the 30s or 40s or even 50s, at least in Ohio, I don't know about New Jersey, but there were no invasive species as we know them. I mean, they really weren't. Lucy Braun, the famous ecologist from Cincinnati, has a little bit about bush honeysuckle in one book, and she says, infrequently invades old fields. And it's not an invader at that point, and it only really started to get going probably in conjunction with the deer coming back. And deer were hunted to extinction by 1900. So when you get up to the 50s, you're starting to see the reintroduction of deer, and then things are starting to change. So you really can go back into time, into a period where, things were much more stable as they were historically versus now where we've got many chaotic elements going on.
So I want to talk to you about some of the type of work you do, but because you mentioned the Black Forager, you have a pretty impressive social media following yourself. And you mentioned before you went on the air that this isn't what you went to school for. And what got you interested in this, and where did you pick up the knowledge base that you have in order to be able to do what you do?
I guess throughout my childhood, I was able to, my grandparents had an 18-acre farm, and I was really into fishing and stuff. So I'd be out there in the woods or running around. So I got to experience a little bit of that and appreciate a little bit, although I wasn't into plants or anything. In fact, plants were the most boring thing I could ever imagine. I mean, animals are interesting, but plants are just like, how could you ever care about? So it's interesting that I took this route, but one particular moment that really got me going was I moved out to Portland, Oregon for a few years. Okay. And in the Columbia River Gorge, I saw the Western Columbine with the red flower. And I just was blown away. I couldn't believe somebody didn't plant this here because it was so beautiful. And it just kind of was remarkable. And then I learned the hummingbirds use it. And that's really the connection between the plants and the animals is really what drew me in. So I really got into it then. And then when I moved home in 2015, I started doing this professionally. So
awesome.
And honestly, I have to say, Facebook, some of this social media stuff, it's a great place to learn ID, to start seeing the images of a certain plant again and again and again and getting it correctly ID'd. It's been really helpful for me. I'm not professionally trained as a botanist or anything, so.
But it's a great way to introduce yourself, and there's a lot of great people doing it. And I was mentioning to Tom the other day, I was like, it was great to see like Griff from Redwoods Rising commenting on one of your videos on TikTok. It was great to kind of see that cool connection of all these awesome influencers doing great work, kind of supporting each other. Yeah, and it
Absolutely.
kind of it shows some of the, like I kind of mentioned before, some of the uniqueness from region to region. Another person who's really active on social media is that counts Lily Bird out of the Panhandle of Florida.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
and it's like some of the stuff she posts is just, I can't imagine seeing those kind of plants because they're just so unique to where she lives and works. And then, but I'm sure she would go crazy for some of the stuff we have up here. So it is interesting seeing like the uniqueness from region to region, and then how people communicate about it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I saw those pink Coreopsis that she showed the other day.
Yeah,
oh my gosh, those were gorgeous. I mean, just blow you away, some of those Florida plants. But I appreciate Griff and Andrew, the arborist. He's awesome. I mean, they've been so supportive and kind of encouraging to me. And I'm really, Kyle Leibarger is a friend, and he's done awesome as well. So really getting the message out.
That's all good really good company. Now, your most popular video on TikTok is about pawpaw, which is Ohio's a little bit of a hot spot for pawpaw. Have you been to the Pawpaw Festival?
I haven't. I wish I could make it out there. It's on the other side of the state from me, but it is kind of the heartland of the pawpaw's range is Ohio. So it's everywhere out here, and the reason is deer don't prefer it, so it's going to be able to survive, whereas others, actually pawpaw and spicebush are two of the most dominant shrubs now in the understory in wooded areas just because of that. So
gotcha. Very cool. So we started off, before I sidetracked everything, we started off talking about a more knowledgeable customer base. So we've talked about lawn conversions on numerous episodes on here. Is that something you find being asked to do more or becoming more popular in your eyes?
I would say so. Yeah. Lawn conversions are definitely getting much more popular. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. Yeah, absolutely.
Would you are you finding it on a grand scale, small scale, a little bit of everything?
As far as the size of the conversion? I guess a little bit of everything. It just kind of depends on the situation and the what the person's looking to do. Some people are trying to kind of get rid of as much lawn as they can, and then other people are, just trying to get started off and see how it goes. A lot of times people will do it and then have it expanded though. So it's very common to do that. Start off with a smaller piece and then piecemeal, keep chipping away at it. So
could you imagine if this was your business model 25 years ago? I was just thinking, imagine going door to door trying to pitch that pre-internet, hey, let's take out your lawn and do a meadow. It seems like that, at least in our circles, more commonplace. But I would imagine to a very large portion of the United States that would seem absurd. So the fact that you're seeing more requests for it, and obviously you're doing more of it, that's a very positive note.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially in Ohio, I look at California or Nevada or something, Arizona. I mean, the rock garden stuff has gotten really popular. I believe they even have local laws about water usage sometimes and things like that. I mean, that's where you're getting forced out of it just because you're in the desert. What the hell are you doing growing grass, But in Ohio or in the temperate East, I mean, it is the default. It really is easy to have it grow. It's not easy to maintain in terms of the amount of mowing, but it's certainly the standard traditional way to maintain a property. So
what for someone that's still on the edge, kind of thinking about it, but hasn't made the jump yet, do you have any advice that you'd give to someone that's considering doing a lawn conversion?
Yes, I would. I would just say go with a small section if you can find a small section that you're comfortable with. It's going to be easier to kind of take on, especially if you're a novice kind of getting into it. Okay, so here's one of the hardest things. It's very difficult for people to just throw down seeds. If you successfully prepare the area and you're cleared all the vegetation, you throw down the seeds and then things start growing. Is that an invasive weed, or is that what your seed mix was? I mean, do you know what a baby landsleaf coreopsis looks like? You know, a lot of people don't, and a lot of people, even native plant gardeners, may not. So that's going to be kind of a challenge. So if you can keep the area smaller and just take on a little bit. Also, I always encourage people to use, these aggressive, quick growing annual and biennial species, partridge pea, black eye Susan, lemon mint would be a good one. There's a few species. Plains coreopsis can be a good one. They come up quick, and they're going to bloom the first year and fill that space. So that can be a successful method as well. And then the other thing that I often do, if it's a smaller area, is use some plugs. So let's say you've got 500 square feet you're doing. Use at least maybe 10 plugs in there of plants that are more conservative plants, like Culver's root, maybe the blue indigo, the wild blue indigo, something like that, a rattlesnake master, things like that. And that will kind of make it mature more quickly and give you something that's going to bloom the first year in addition to the seeding. So and that might help out.
That's fantastic advice, because you want a little bit of soil cover. You want something that's going to be in there and take up some of the soil, so it's not a lot of bare ground while you're waiting for the seed. But one of the points you just made, which I think is really, really important, and this is something even for nursery professionals that can be difficult. Like our trusty sidekick, Christiane on Native Plant Every Day, is our seed salesperson, and she's doing a small meadow on her own property, like a lawn conversion. And what was coming up, she wasn't sure. She's like, I'm having difficulty. Can you look at this? I'm having difficulty. Is this Virginia wild rye? Now, at a nursery setting, you get so used to seeing everything at an immature age that sometimes when you're in a forest, it's saying, is this what I think it is? Or you're so used to seeing everything large, but not at an immature stage. And sometimes you don't make that connection that sometimes oaks don't have that same leaf that they do when they're 6 inches tall as when they're 60 feet tall. So it's a lot to know. And it's like, if you're looking for photos of Virginia wild rye on the internet, you can find plenty of mature photos, but can you find them of just blade emergence? Like it really isn't as easy as you would think, even for a professional, because it's a lot of knowledge just to retain.
And one thing I'll bring up, because Ernst Seed used to have it, I'm assuming it's somewhere on their website still. I'm trying to look through a little bit. I haven't found it yet. But they used to have like a database. I think it was just a PDF file that you could scroll through, and had pictures of like 100 and some different species that when they were just starting to germinate. So you just have that little bit coming up. And it wasn't perfect by any means, but there's a bunch of times where I actually utilized it, where I'm looking at something on a job site and I'm like, I think this is what it is, but let me just check this and see if it makes sure. So that's a resource. If I can find it, we'll put in the show notes that'll be up there too.
Yeah,
because that's a super important thing is how do you define success or not? People tend to be impatient with the kind of stuff, and they want to know what's coming up is what they think it is, or what they hope it is, not what they hope it's not.
We got asked to come look at a project that a local soil conservation district was doing, where they were converting a retention basin into a bioinfiltration basin. And it was huge. It's in front of a minor league baseball stadium here in New Jersey. And they asked us to come out to help them identify what was coming up, so they could get some sort of measure as to if they were being successful. Well, right before we came out, Municipal Works came and mowed the basin. So imagine standing there in this like 3-acre basin looking at the crowns of everything mowed off, saying, I think this is switchgrass, and I think this is this. It's daunting, and it's easy to say, I'm not confident in any of this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be difficult. That can be a very, difficult step. So, use those plugs and get a small space that's manageable, and then learn those annual species. Like Black-Eye Susan is one of the easiest because it has the little hairy leaves. And I often tell customers, look for these little hairy leaves, and they're all throughout the seeding area. So it is possible. It's just kind of a lot to take on when you're looking at everything. So
yeah, but I really like that advice. It's something that I often say as well, is make sure whatever mix you're putting in has something that's going to give you that immediate, I don't want to say immediate gratification, but quick gratification, especially if you can get something like Black-Eyed Susans and I'm blanking on the other one.
Yeah, Partridge Pea or something like that.
Something that gives you a little bit of early color. Like Partridge Pea isn't a showy flower, but it has some flower. And then also, if you need that quicker buildup, is incorporating some larger plants or plugs, just so you have, again, immediate gratification. And I've even advocated for some of the stuff that takes a longer time to germinate. Maybe you work that in as a plug, like Baptisia australis is one by us, or was it Blue Wild Indigo or Wild Blue Indigo? Blue Wild Indigo, right?
Yeah. Maybe it's Wild Blue Indigo.
Yeah, you might not see for 6-7 years if you did it by seed. Put that in as a plug, and now it'll be flowering in 3 years, and you kind of jump the process a little bit. Yeah. So no, I think it's great advice. Yep.
That's fantastic advice. So, as you start doing this, obviously you've been doing this before your own business and now as your own business. Are prairie seedings difficult? Is that something that's a little more difficult than your average environmental work?
I would say so, just because of all of the factors. It's not necessarily that any one thing is so difficult, one factor would be so difficult to deal with, but you have to be aware of what can happen and the different weeds that could be happening, and the difference between, a teasel invasion, the invasive teasel, versus Canada thistle that can move and sucker through its roots, rhizomatically or whatever. So takes different treatment methods, and you're not going to be able to just pull up Canada thistle because it's going to sprout up from the roots again, whereas teasel, maybe you could do something like that. So just so many factors like that is, I think, what makes it difficult, more so than any one task. But yeah, probably more difficult than like just making a pollinator garden or something like that. However, if you did have a bed that you wanted to make into a pollinator garden or convert from a more traditional bed, get your pollinator plants in there, and then try maybe a seeding of some of these annual species in between the plugs. So plant your plugs, however dense you feel you want them, and then seed in the Black-Eye Susan or Partridge Pea or whatever it may be in the blank space in between, and let that be your green mulch, essentially.
Awesome.
So.
Awesome.
And then in a few years, they'll fade when the perennials are larger and the perennials knit together, and then you're not having to deal with the weeds as bad. So,
well, that's how I was kind of going, Gas. Not so much weed, but knowing, invasives weren't a problem, but now they are. Whenever you're doing a conversion, are you having difficulty keeping invasives out?
Yeah, I guess the reality is they are just everywhere, especially near the metros. So if you're really out in rural Ohio, you may have less invasive pressure. The closer you get to a city, you're going to have way more. But it's just a kind of a thing, just like any old field is going to have calorie pair. It's just they keep, they're invading. So no stopping them.
Have you had any pleasant surprise? Like, I know most developments are bringing in, like, they're stripping and bringing in soil. Like, have you had any pleasant surprise where you see things volunteering that were maybe in the seed bank and weren't initially in the mix that you put in? Like, oh wow, like look at these volunteered in. Like this wasn't even part of the plan.
Absolutely. And I guess that would be kind of the converse to the invasive plants is sometimes you get the native volunteers, and the further away you are from the city, the more likely those positive volunteers are going to jump in there. Evening primrose is a great biennial that is commonly found in disturbed areas. So you'll get that coming in. All of the asters, the kind of smaller weedy asters, the white colored ones, normally they're volunteering pretty vigorously. Of course, horseweed and things like that, the native weedy things are going to jump in there as well. So
very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I just punched my microphone. Yeah, it's one of those days today. When you're working on a prairie seeding, is it difficult for you to find, like, you're doing your research, you're saying, hey, this is, if we're restoring, these are some of the things, if I look around realistically, these are things we should be incorporating into these prairies. Is it, even as a professional, is it difficult to find the diversity and the provenance that you are shooting for when you're doing a prairie seeding? Like, I know we see some seed mixes come through here spec from very well-known people in the industry, and we look at some of the mixes and go, where are you going to find this? Like, some of them, like, I've gotten to the point where some of them, like, I've never heard of these plants.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know where you're going to get it. Like, are you finding that a problem?
That has been difficult. I mean, it's definitely gotten better the past few years, but it is difficult to find seeds. And I collect a lot of local seeds from places where I can. I mean, there's a lot of places where native plants are growing along industrial areas or something that you can collect that aren't in a state park, and some nice remnants out there, especially in places that are just recently developed. So
nice.
It is kind of difficult to find, but roundstone seed is a great source out of Kentucky. Ernst seed, as Tom mentioned, that's a really great source. And I was going to mention as well, if you're doing a prairie seeding, look at roundstone and look at Ernst and look at their pre-made mixes and how they create them. And if you want to copy that, you can copy that, or you can just buy their pre-made mix for your region. But they've got, they've done the work for you if you want to buy a pre-made mix for whatever eco region you're in. So
yeah,
Ohio Prairie Nursery is another seed source for me, at least. It's all Ohio seed. So
it's actually kind of nice where you're located. You have some major players right in your backyard, right in your backyard, which isn't a luxury a lot of people have.
Yeah, but
that's true.
You bring up a good point there too. Is a stock seed mix from a seed or a place that sells seed always going to be perfect for your environment? Maybe not, but typically gives you a good guideline. Like I know the folks at Roundstone. I know the folks at Ernst. Like Ernst is a guy, Mark Feely, who's I don't even know what his real background is. Knows more about plants than I could probably ever dream of knowing. Yeah. And can tell you, like, just, it's as if he's like a guest on Jeopardy, and it's like, what's the seeding rate on Drunkest Fuchsias? Oh, you never want to go over, like, I don't even want to make up a number and embarrass myself. But he just can pull out all this stuff, like how many pounds per acre you want of certain things, and at what point is it too much? At what point is it too little? They've got really, really intelligent people who've put this stuff together, and so it's not like it's thrown at a wall willy nilly, and it's
and you can't say enough about going to a reputable native seed source.
Yeah.
I mean, you do not want to buy from somebody that's not reputable or that's way outside, that's not giving you your local, species that are native. And Ernst and Roundstone are two really great. Prairie Moon is another one, although honestly, they're a little more expensive. They have a little wider selection though. So you might be able to find species that others don't offer, but, it's really important to get one of those. And you're going to notice 25 to 30 forb species in a seed mix, and probably at least 4 or 5 grass or sedge species. So you don't want to you don't want to have one of these weak mixes with 10 flowers in there. That's not going to work very well. So,
and like all things considered, the whole idea of a pre-mixed seed mix isn't that old of a concept. Like, I think going back 25 years, I don't know that Ernst was offering pre-mixed seed mixes.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't think they were.
It's something I've heard, but I don't know for certain if that's the case.
I heard
well,
from someone
and I
Ernst,
have to say, I think it goes back to I'm on the different side than him, but you got to go back to George W. Bush, who did that quail stuff in the CRP lands. In the early 2000s, that was very significant, and that caused a lot of farmers to put land into CRP, and then you start having this industry being built. So that was actually a really seminal moment for all this. So.
Obviously, with all kidding aside, like our industry doesn't exist probably without the Clean Water Act in 1973. Like I think that was the start of it. And then for us locally, some of the legislation around the Pine Barrens and protecting that area. I think a lot of this is driven just by legislature, whether you realize it or not. And I don't think going back prior to that, there was a lot of need for a pre-mixed seed mix. If you go back 17 years when I started here, now granted we weren't a seed supplier, but we had 2 seed mixes. We had a basin bottom and a basin slope, and that was it.
Yeah.
And that's all anyone really cared about. And that's Ernst was kind of just really expanding a lot of those mixes at that point.
Yeah. And Fran brings up a good point there. Like with Pinelands Nursery, we started in
83.
Depends on who you ask. The 83 or 84.
Right, yes.
Depends if you ask my mom or my dad. But if you really go back then and you look at what other native plant nurseries are around on the East Coast, there's only one that I know of, and that's Environmental Concern. Yeah. I know there was some in the Midwest. I think Prairie Nursery, before Neil DeBoll got involved, or he might have been working there at the time before he owned it. I think someone started that in like late 70s, early 80s. There's a reason a lot of these nurseries popped up in like probably early 80s or late 70s to early 90s. And,
like Octoraro popped up 5 years after we did.
Yeah.
It's like all around that time that's you started to see the need for it.
And that's because the demand really focused then. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Austin, is how important is finding local ecotype seed to your projects? You're doing residential lawn conversions for the most part. Is that like a top priority for you, or is it something that can fall down the list?
It is a top priority for me, and I've come to appreciate it more in recent years as we start to learn more about all of these connections, from the micro bio of the soil to all kinds of different tiny insects that may or may not even be described, some of these fly species and stuff. I mean, there's not many people in the world looking closely at them. And there's all kinds of relationships. And the more you learn, the more you realize this really could be, maybe botanically, it's not a variety, but this species growing here. And you got to think, maybe I'm in a fen in Ohio. This species of cup plant could have been here since 10,000 years ago when the glaciers receded and the plants started to march back north. So its genetic line could be thousands of years old, connected with this spot. And, that's very important. I mean, it is something that if you really can't find the seed, you can make a compromise. But I try to look at it more as a restoration as opposed to maybe a gardening thing where you could allow more compromises like that. I really try to get as close as I can to local ecotypes. So very essential, I think.
Awesome. I'm happy to hear that. I know I'm trying to remember, it was a Wild Ones organization in New England, and I can't remember which state it was, but they had put together a hierarchy of choices, which was like, if you're just getting into
I think I saw that. Yeah, that was great.
And it was like, hey, if I can get local provenance, that's my number one option. But if that's not an option, this is the number 2, and work your way down. Like, and I think at the end was, you're going to get a cultivar because you can't get straight species, you can't get local provenance, you can't get this and that. But at least it gave you options like, it's a native plant, but it's not local, or it's this, but it's a cultivar. And they kind of broke it down to you say, as long as you're following this, you're doing the best that you can.
Absolutely. And that's important to kind of keep in mind. And I do make compromises. Like, for example, the annuals I've talked about, Plains Coreopsis is not native to Ohio, but it's a very weak annual. It can't compete with other perennial vegetation. So I do use it in a lot of seedings, in especially residential areas, because it comes up quick, it gives you the beautiful blooms, and it just works well. But then it also fades after 2 or 3 years, and you really don't have them around. You might have small patches, but then they eventually fade in a few more years. So you don't need to be an entirely purist. You need to kind of get the job done at a certain level and be pragmatic. So that's important as well.
Stay tuned for more of the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Welcome back to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
I agree, because sometimes, your options are limited, but cash is a factor. Like, how much can you afford to put into this? Like, you want to do as much good as you can. And sometimes you have to weigh those factors out of, I could be pure, but if I do these things, I can do more.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's important. It really is. It's one of those ways of thinking that it's a good checklist to go through on your head to make sure you're just, some things are more important. Like you said, like maybe there's communities where it's like, this is really important to preserve and have this here. But some areas where it's like, maybe I can get away with this and do a little bit more. And yes, it is compromise, and it would be lovely to be a purist, but I don't know that we can all afford to be purists.
But we can make reasonable decisions. Like, for example, I don't know, I think I'm remembering, is purple coneflower not native to parts of the Northeast?
Correct.
Yes.
It's all introduced here. Yeah.
So that's, that's not something you'd want to use in maybe a seeding restoration near a wild area. But if you're in the center of town and you're doing a pollinator planting and you put that in there, that's fine. I mean, that's a disturbed area in the middle of a city or something. That's the kind of things where you can be sensible about this stuff. And not be a purist about, we need all, flowers that would have grown where this village square is at. You can make some compromises and be reasonable and still be ethical about it, I guess is what I'm saying.
And Tom and I just had this conversation the other day, and it's one that really, until we had the conversation, I knew, but it never dawned on me that we were talking about butterfly milkweed, and which is a very difficult plant to grow. And he's like, if we could grow as many as we could, how many could you sell? And when I told Tom the number, he's like, that's not as large as I thought. And I go, because its natural populations in New Jersey are so minimal that you're never really going to see it on a restoration, or if you do, it's in small numbers. But that's the one native plant that a lot of homeowners want, because they know of the monarch, and I want to help the monarch. And sometimes it's your priority. Like, maybe that's not the best native plant for your area, but are you doing good by planting that? Like, it's still a native plant. Technically, it is still native in New Jersey, but you're helping the cause of the monarch. Is that better than not planting it at all?
Yeah. Or putting in common milkweed and then 2 years later realizing, holy crap, this is taking over the whole bed. What have I done? But, maybe you did technically the right thing, but that's not going to work as well as maybe another milkweed species. So, yeah, absolutely.
And those are tough conversations, but good conversations. And I don't know if there's really a right or wrong. And
I remember you guys talking about the cultivar issue. I wanted to say about that, because that's a really interesting topic that people are always seeking information on. There really is a big difference between a red echinacea that has been bred that way through, I don't know how exactly, and a selection of a native plant. So some of these cultivars are selections of wild native plants that they just happen to find whatever, the blue stem that looked very blue, and they decided to select that out. They didn't breed it. They just found it and selected it. So that's that's a big difference between something that's been potentially the leaf color has changed, the flower color has changed, the structure has changed of the flower, something like that.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. So
Tom and I had an experience. I'm not going to mention names, location. I'm not even going to give the full story, but
I'm trying to wonder what you're about to say.
it was something we agreed not to talk about, but it just happened to be somewhere where they were breeding plants.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
And
I do remember this.
They mentioned that, we can take this plant and introduce volatile chemicals and mutate it to change the thickness of the stem so that it doesn't flop, or change the color of the flower. And it's such exciting work. And a lot of the people we're with were very excited. I think just about everyone but us.
Yeah.
But us. And it was like, well, it's not, and the question was, well, why aren't you excited about it? And it's like, well, that goes against every value that we have on what we do, like what our business was based on. Like, we evolve in we believe in genetic diversity. Mm-hmm. We believe in evolution. We believe in all these things. And what's the difference between mutating a plant to have a thicker stem than mutating a person with 4 legs and creating a better army? Like, it's like,
right.
It might be possible, but is it ethically right? And that was kind of the conversation that was had. And I think we just kind of agreed to disagree, like very politely. But
well, and then furthermore, there's probably a native plant that could serve the same purpose, whether it's height or uprightness or whatever it may be.
Or color.
They just
or
maybe don't know it,
And for a lot of their goals was uniqueness in eye appeal. They wanted to look cool
and patent.
And be able to patent it. That was the financial motivations.
Yes.
But it was, they wanted it so something that would look cool, but that was all it was going to do. Where a lot of the folks that are in native plants, they want more function. They want it to, you need
ecosystem
something in your garden
services,
that's going to, looking like, and I kind of asked like where ecotype is on your list of priorities, but for a lot of the folks that are into native plants, curb appeal is kind of falling down that list, and ecological function is starting to become what's at the top. Now, that doesn't mean people don't want it to look nice. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of people who want it to look like just as nice as their neighbor's garden, but they're willing to sacrifice some of that curb appeal for function. So that was a lot of the folks that were in that group weren't thinking about.
No,
the functions they were thinking about are deer not going to eat it, or my neighbors or people's neighbors going to be jealous that I have this and they don't, and
I sell it?
Can I sell a bunch of it?
Is there market?
Is it going to die or is it like going to be a good garden performer? There maybe there's some slight emphasis on like erosion control. Is it going to root out the right way?
Is it going to overtake?
Or is it going to be? It's going to be too aggressive. But yeah, it was not on. Are insects going to be eating this? Not pollinators, but are insects actually going to be eating the leaves? Those kind of things. There was not even a thought to that kind of stuff. It
spawned a night of interesting conversation.
Yeah. It sure did.
But nothing real. And I don't want to go into it any more than that. Yeah. But I don't think it's fair. But and as Tom said, you're not going to appeal to everyone either. And Austin, this will be the first time we're talking about this. I know you liked a couple of the comments in our Facebook group. We had someone, I think, legitimately just asking why forsythia is bad.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And but I couldn't. I was a little shocked that they're like I kind of gave a brief explanation of reasons, like, hey, it's sterile, it doesn't really produce pollen, the native wildlife isn't going to eat it. And their response was, well, sometimes you just need eye candy. And I realized at that response, I'm like, I don't know that this is someone that's going to understand or really wants to understand why we look at things the way we look at it. Although I wanted it to be a teaching.
I think you approached
moment.
It really well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But that's that sometimes. And, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes we're just going to have to say, we're not going to reach some people and try to educate the ones that are interested. Because honestly, the people who are interested are growing every day and every year. It's just more and more. So
And I can only hope that maybe there was one comment in that list that made the person think, maybe I need to rethink this. I don't know that there was. I think there were a lot of really well presented, great information. I thought some of the responses could have been handled a little better. That's why I just didn't want it to be a nightmare.
Absolutely. That reminds me though, I just, last week I'm working on this swale restoration next to a wet prairie with a Girl Scout troop. Mm-hmm. So they're trying to do their Bronze Star thing by restoring this, and we're taking out the invasives. We're going to plant natives in the fall and seed it down. But that's perhaps a more fruitful spot to put our efforts into the children and into the people who really just don't know and don't have any opinion. They don't have any connection to any of these plants. They're just new at everything, and they're interested in the world. And there's a lot of beauty out there to show kids, and they don't get a lot of it anymore. So that can be a positive thing. I
agree. And Tom and I have been fortunate enough to go to a few schools and talk to students, and there's some wonderful teachers. I'm going to give a shout out to Zach Rittner at Scotch Plains Fanwood High School. Just his is it environmental? It's a science club, environmental science club. Oh
yeah, is it called? No, cause is the Connecticut. I'm trying to think of the acronym they had.
But it's to hear students present to us passionately and say, "This is what I want to do for a career," and to kind of. That wasn't even an option when I went to high school. Like, I didn't even know that career existed. I'm sure it existed, but I personally didn't know it existed. Mm-hmm. And to see kids wearing shirts about nature and this is my passion, this is what I want to do. And teachers fostering that and seeing, the particular school that we're talking about got permission to convert a barren courtyard into a native teaching garden.
Okay, I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, right. A partially like this section's foraging, this part, where they know they won't get deer pressure and they'll be able to foster birds and other animals in there, but also have it protected enough where it can survive. And it was just, I agree with you. Like, I think you would have more of an opportunity to do that with a group of teenagers than you would a group of 40 and 50-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's, a group of kids with some sharp folding saws or some loppers. They can do a lot of damage on those invasives now. They got a lot of energy. So that's a beautiful thing to see as well.
And it's information they're going to carry with them throughout their lives. I think of recycling is probably not a great example, but how many people that are in their mid-30s, like around my age now, that are like, oh, I just grew up knowing I put paper, plastic bottles, metal cans into the blue recycling bin, and just became a part of what their lives from that. And like even learning about monarchs, a lot of people clung onto that as they got older. And I think that's something that class in particular is going to be like, you can't unlearn it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's going to stick with them, and it's just going to stick with them and help guide them through how they interact with nature and gardening and all that. Yeah.
Now, I want to bring up, because we mentioned in their garden that they're creating a foraging garden. Mm-hmm. You have a little bit of a background with foraging, am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. Or at least kind of interest in the forageable native plants. Yeah. I would almost say that I'm less of a forager and more of like an advocate for planting native edibles on your property.
Okay.
Or in public parks and things like that. I'm honestly a terror. I can't really cook or anything. So, if it's a wild plum, I love it, but I can't process this stuff, so that's kind of my experience. But yeah, there's certainly so many native edibles out there. So
where did you start? Where did you get the courage to start and feel comfortable to where you are now?
In terms of the foraging?
Foraging, yeah.
I would say it is important to get out there and walk with some people that know more than you, especially in the beginning, so they can identify stuff for you and let you chew on some wood sorrel or whatever it may be. That's kind of a nice introduction. You probably need someone, an expert to walk around with, whether it's wildflower society near you, or a native plant, or wild ones, you could probably find something like that to start learning some of the plants. And then Samuel Thayer, I mean, he's the man when it comes to that book that he just put out. Oh my gosh, have you guys gotten that?
I haven't got a copy of it yet, but I've heard it's fantastic.
It's ridiculous. I mean, his other books are really good too, if you've seen those, but this one is just an absolute, I mean, it's like a dictionary, really. It's so many plants. I didn't even know a lot of these things could be eaten. So he's done a really great job. So that's a great resource. And
how far are you from where he does his classes in Illinois? Are you close enough?
Wisconsin.
Oh, it's in Wisconsin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fran has this thing where you get to other parts of the country and he doesn't realize how far apart they are.
Everything's close here.
He's
in New
not
Jersey.
realizing that, like, where you are in Southeast Ohio is probably like 8 hours from where.
But that's why
I
just asked.
Yeah, no, I hear you though. It sometimes can
with
be.
When we were talking with Taylor Collins from Rome Ranch.
Yeah.
He's so they're near Austin, Texas, and we have a meeting in Phoenix, Arizona. and it's like, oh, maybe when we go out there, we like those are not close at all.
Well, it was funny,
especially out west.
When we had Camille Dungy on, we had her on like a Tuesday, and then she did a talk that Friday in Princeton, New Jersey. And she didn't mention to us that she was going to be here, and she didn't think about it till afterwards. She's like, the next day she emailed me, and she's like, some of your listeners were at the thing, or the event at Princeton, and I didn't think about she goes, where I'm from, everything is so far away. I didn't realize you were only going to be 30 minutes away from where I was speaking. She goes, I forgot that the East Coast, everything is so close together.
Mm.
Yep.
So I'm an East Coast guy.
Yeah.
I can't help it. What advice would you give to someone who would like to bring the act of foraging to their yard? If for someone that's like, maybe I'm not that comfortable going out in the wild, but I'd like to incorporate this into my landscape.
Great question. I love the thicket species, the wild plum, hazelnut, pawpaw, chokecherry. Persimmon is kind of more of a tree, but serviceberry is a great one. Cranberry, those are all great. And those are great options because they're going to create fruit after a few years in the ground. And it's not like waiting on an oak or a hickory to make their acorns or nuts. So kind of quick results. And you also get an abundance of it. And normally fruit is a very kind of easy entry point. Of course, there's sunchokes, the Jerusalem artichokes, and things like that. The ground nut is a great tuber plant. There's a lot of tuber edibles. That's one of the things that Sam Thayer does so good with. But evening primrose, purple poppy mallow has a edible tuber. Nodding onion, sweet flag.
I didn't know evening primrose had that. That's awesome.
Yeah, a Solomon seal is another edible tuber. The native Solomon seal, wild hyacinth. So yeah, those might be options. There's a lot of vegetable native plants that you can eat as well. Cutleaf coneflower is one of the classics. The Cherokee referred to it as sochan. It's a basically a really easy to collect and grow native edible. Spiderwort, wood nettle, and stinging nettle. If you cook them at all, the hairs fall off. The stinging hairs fall off. So they're very great tasting after you cook them. Of course, the ramps and things that people know about like that. Grape leaves are a great edible species. They use them over in Greece. I forget the dish name, but it's interesting to see the plants that are native to other parts of the world, how they use them in traditional meals. And we don't use it like that here, but you can sometimes get an idea. I think over in Korea, they're really into the lotus tubers.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they eat them almost like potatoes. So we've got American lotus, and certainly native people were eating that. So.
And duck potato, another great one. You mentioned what was nice about what you just mentioned I mean, that was a nice varied list, but so many of those are available within the trade. Like many of those are things that we grow in, like cutleaf coneflower, sweet flag, things like that should be relatively a little bit easier to find. And some of those things you may already even just have on your property that you mentioned.
Absolutely. Yep. And then, talking about if you get even wider and talk about the teas and stuff, I mean, the wild roses, you can get the hips from them. Wild bergamot can be used for, New Jersey tea, of course, kind of says it in the name, echinacea. There's a lot of different species that you can use that for. Sumac-ade, making the... And even, sassafras, I mean, like they created root beer with sassafras until they did some sort of weird study and gave mice, 50,000 times the amount that you could ever consume, and they got cancer. So it was like they banned it because of that. But that's another kind of tea, basically, from a native plant root that we know very well, but maybe the artificial version very well now.
But I always find that interesting as far as, like, if you're going to test sassafras with mice, not every plant is toxic to every level of wildlife interaction. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it does that with mice, but is it going to do that with everything?
Absolutely. And I think talking about Sam Thayer again, didn't he mention some of the species and how colonization has kind of painted these in a negative light? Despite them being, I mean, even, stuff like potatoes, I think the Europeans thought were poisonous for decades after they brought them back because they were, in that family. So we've got to be careful about that. And now's time to start revising some of our views on this. And
that was probably one of the most interesting conversations that we've had on this podcast with Samuel Thayer, was just like, let's get political about this. Let's talk about how this connection between us and our natural food has been, wiped clean, to make so that people couldn't just be self-dependent on the land. And it was a very good point, and it's something that you don't always think about. Like, why do we eat this and not this? Yeah. Or why... like you mentioned, all these things that are readily available, but not something most people have ever tried or seen in a restaurant, or like I love that ramps are becoming very popular, but I also don't want to see the populations disappear due to that popularity. Yeah, exactly. So it's I know it's a fine line, and I can't remember who it was that said it, but not everyone could be vegetarian because there's not enough sustenance out there to keep everyone alive. If you were to do it. I was going to mention, in terms of the history of this area, there's only a few places in the entire world where agriculture was created. So I think, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, different places like that. But actually here in Kentucky and the Ohio Valley, there was the Eastern Agricultural Complex where native people, cultivated squash, goosefoot, knotweed, maygrass, the annual sunflowers that we know. Little barley was another one that they did. Amaranth, that we now call pigweed in the most disrespectful, these are the things they do to the native plants. It's an edible native plant. But that's a really incredible story that happened, and they were able to. Now all those are lost. All those cultivate, the seeds were actually bigger in the archaeological sites that they found. So the now existing maygrass and little barley, they have smaller seeds. So we've lost those cultivars, but it was done here, and that's just kind of an interesting little tidbit. Certainly, the indigenous heritage of the area is like just an incredible thing that we should all learn more about and appreciate. They really shaped the landscape and took care of the landscape, and were stewards in ways that we could learn a whole lot from. Yeah. I was just listening to a podcast the other day. I actually brought it up, a different episode, but I brought it up in our last episode. But there's a podcast I really like called Bear Grease by a guy, Clay Newcomb. And he's talking, he had a couple episodes on wilderness and the concept of wilderness. And
actually talks to another guy I know, Adam Keith from Land and Legacy, who's out in Missouri, and but they were talking about how when European colonists had gotten here, how the land looked vacant to them, but they just didn't realize how it had been managed by Native American populations for like thousands of years at that point, and in some part because of disease spread and how some of these populations had died off. So they're looking at these young forests and all this stuff, and it's just because you had people who were managing it, and then they went away for a lot of them because they died off. But yeah, they talk about how you had Native Americans managing the land and doing some of those like quasi agricultural practices. So no, that's fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was really using fire to manage the landscape at a huge scale, and intentionally creating these habitats that brought in the game animals that they were interested in, and also the wetlands that were allowed, where you would get the fur-bearing animals that eventually became important in the trade. So very sophisticated. When you kind of think about it, the native people, especially in the Ohio River Valley, were very plugged into the international trade and with Europe, and were using the resources in the area to kind of, get what they needed and survive for a long period of time. So even after the Europeans showed up. So
it was interesting, even just hearing Taylor Collins say, like, sometimes the animals just know what to do. You don't, like, if you let bison go, like, they know what to eat. Like, if they have a native diet, they'll pick, if their stomach's upset, they'll eat this. If, like, they know what plants do what. And I think,
absolutely,
which is something we're not plugged into at all. But I'm sure if you're managing the land for thousands of years, you probably have a good idea of watching. Like, you're not glued to a phone at that point in time. You're saying, hey, I'm noticing the bison are eating this and that, and you're more tuned into that environment, and we've lost a lot of that, obviously.
Absolutely.
Over the, and it's funny how quickly it had been done for thousands of years, but you lose it over a couple hundred years.
Yeah, and intentionally, is the U.S. government encouraged the killing of bison, and in many other ways. I mean, that's the big one that people talk about, but there was so many different ways that this was done. So, and I also appreciate, Tom, you bringing up the story about Tecumseh. About 10 miles up the road north from me is the village where Tecumseh was born. So it's called Old Town, and he was born there, and he kind of worked in this area as well as eastern Indiana to unite the tribes and everything. And he was battling against William Henry Harrison, and who was at the time governor of Indiana. So it was, really intense time, and the eclipse story is just incredible. How that was used. And then later, I was going to say, in relation to what happened to you guys a few days ago, the earthquake in 1811, there was the New Madrid quake down in Illinois, Missouri area. So this was like a 7.8 earthquake, and they felt it in Washington D.C. It was like wild. It repositioned the Ohio River. Apparently, the Ohio River ran backwards for a certain amount of time. Just absolutely stunning. And this was also used in a similar way to the eclipse at the time to kind of encourage the unity of the native tribes. And that was shortly before Tecumseh was killed up in Canada. So really cool, though. I've got to check out that podcast. That sounds great.
I encourage everyone to do it, just from, if you like history, especially of that region. Just really unique individual who did some amazing things in his time, and probably not when you think of important people in United States history. His name is not one that you're probably familiar with, but he really was quite integral to where we are today.
Absolutely. And let me plug real quick. We've got the newest Ohio State Park opening up in Old Town. They've built this interpretive center right where Old Town was, and they're going to make it basically all about, the village that was there, and that it was a Shawnee village, but it was actually, there were many, many different tribes that all came there and lived there, at 10,000 people. Wow. So it was it was basically the capital of the Shawnee Nation around the Revolutionary War period and a little bit after. So very significant spot. And I'm glad to see the Ohio state is officially starting to kind of recognize this. Very important stuff. So
very nice.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Just for the sake of time, because I'm looking at the clock and there's still at least one or two more things I wanted to cover. Sometimes it's not the work that you do, it's who you help. And you're involved with a couple conservation organizations that you're currently helping out. Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. One that I'm on the board of would be Beaver Creek Wetlands Association. And Beaver Creek Wetlands is just preserving wetland habitat in to the east of Dayton is the area of Beaver Creek. So this was very, very high quality wetland that quickly was getting developed. And in the late 80s, they created this association to start preserving it. And it kept up the good work all this time. So I've joined it a few years ago, and that's a really great organization. I encourage people to check out if you're in Ohio or the area. We've got some really good preserves that are wonderful to walk through.
Awesome. And
then the other one would be the Midwest Native Plant Society. Okay. This is probably a 30-year-old organization, and each year they do an annual conference in Dayton, which collects all of the native plant growers and artisans, things like that. And it's a really great weekend where they have a conference with speakers, but they also have a public sale on Saturday. And you find native plants that are very difficult to find in other times of year, because they all come together, all the growers. So that's something I wanted to just kind of plug and let people know about. I think it's August 2nd through the 4th.
Awesome.
This year. So that if you're in the area, definitely come check that out and connect. I mean, it's really, we all nerd out on this stuff and want to talk, and you get in a group of people like that. It's a lot of fun. So
that sounds like a great time. I'm sorry that we're so far away from that. That sounds like something I would enjoy. I also wanted to just, we kind of touched on your social media presence, and some of your videos are so well done. What kind of started you working towards doing some of those videos?
That's a good question. I guess I just really wanted to educate people about it. I had posted on Facebook before, but and Facebook's fine, but some of the TikTok and Instagram doing the video stuff, I think that really is able to portray things better than just a picture and some text. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what got me going on that. That kind of, and the encouragement from other creators. So yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, can you plug your social media handles for everyone? Yeah, I will put them in the show notes too, but if you could do that.
Absolutely. Let's see. It's Birdsong Landscapes on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. I suppose that's it. I'm not sure what it's just Birdsong Landscapes. So if you look that up, you'll find me. I don't think there's any other bird songers out there. So
there's not another Andrew the Arborist out there in the same state. Which I'll just share this real fast, because I forgot we had that conversation with Andrew, that there was him being in Philadelphia and the other one being in Pittsburgh. But he recently stopped into the nursery. Tom gave him a nice tour, and they bought some plants for his nonprofit, and we tagged the wrong Andrew the Arborist initially in the...
Oh, did we really?
Yeah.
I didn't know
there is too?
There really is too, yeah.
Wow.
In the same state, just on opposite sides of the state, yeah. But we accidentally tagged the wrong one, but quickly caught it and fixed it, but yeah.
Yeah.
So you never know. There could be another Birdsong.
Yeah, that's true.
You're going to have to Google it.
Yep.
That's right.
So I think we're at the point as you know, and I'm sure at some point, if you've listened to enough episodes, you've thought in your head what this answer might be. But we're at the last question, which is always the same question, the easiest question yet the hardest question, and that would be, what is your favorite native plant?
Yeah, that is a tough question, and I always do think about it. I don't know if anyone said this yet, but I have to go with American plum, Prunus americana, wild plum. I mean, this thing you can go on Bone app and check it out. It's got a range from like the West Coast all the way over. I mean, it's almost the entire continental U.S. except for the Southwest. But plums in general, no matter where you're at, there's a local plum that's adapted to your environment. The Klamath plum down in Northern California, but American plum has to be mine. You've got the sweet smelling, beautiful blooms that are just profuse in the spring and are helping all those queen bumblebees and native early emerging pollinators. And then you've got a huge hosting capacity, just like any cherry prunus. It's going to host over 380 Lepidoptera and many more other insects. And then you've got the edible fruit that wildlife like and that we can make jelly from by August or September. That's dropping. So you've just got a really great, and it's quick growing, easy to grow. It can sucker up and create a thicket, which is a very rare and almost totally lost type of habitat that gets overlooked a lot. So I just love the American plums. It was one of the more dominant shrubs in Ohio in the shrublands. There's one account where they're going down the Ohio River, and this guy says there was like miles of American plum thicket that they were going past. And it was just, you could imagine that would have just been an amazing sight. So
I can't even imagine. That would be wonderful. I will add to that about 4 years ago, my brother-in-law had made American plum wine. Which was some of the most amazing wine I ever had. I just mentioned it to him over Easter. I was like, hey, when are you going to make some more of that? And he goes, you know what? He goes, I haven't been able to replicate it. He goes, that there was something about that year that the wine came out great. And he goes, I haven't. He goes, I've made wine with other things, but I can't do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
I wonder if he's using the same patch because I will say there's a variety of flavor with the plums. Sometimes you get excellent flavor and sometimes it's a little more fair. So I don't know. It's a wide variety. It's interesting.
Maybe that's what it was, but that's a great choice. No one has said that before. So that's a wonderful choice. I appreciate that. Cool. But now we move on to final thought. We always let you go first. And this is kind of where we hand it over to you. We give you the floor. You can use the space however you want to use it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me and being able to talk about this stuff. This is great. And I love to see all of this growing. I guess I just have to say, if people want to get more involved, check out some of these creators like Griff, like Andrew the Arborist. Check out some of the organizations. The Nature Conservancy is a giant one, but Homegrown National Park, rather, is an excellent organization that gives you a lot of resources about the keystone species in your area. And it's Doug Tallamy's organization. So, it's going to be, stellar. Yeah. And, there's just so many resources out there now that I think that we can really do a great job restoring this stuff. So I just hope to see things continue forward the way that we've been doing them and get things back right. So.
That's a great final thought. Tom, you want me to go or do you want to go?
I can go.
All right.
And mine is this is highlighting like another organization that kind of does this in your neck of the woods. A while ago we had on Tim Mack. Yeah. And kind of said, because there's a lot of times we hear is like, I don't have the skills to do it myself. I'm interested, but I need help. I need someone who can help me out. Well, this is just kind of highlighting someone else who can help you out through that process. So if you're in that Ohio River Valley, hey, we just connected you with someone who's an expert in the field.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think for my final thought, and it's funny that you bring up Tim Mack, and then you have Austin. This wasn't what they went to college to do. This wasn't their first career choice. It wasn't my first career choice. So when you're feeling a little lost or you're thinking this is too much for me or I don't know where to start, we all started the same way. we all kind of there is a path to take that will get you to that knowledge. Never stop learning. Ask a lot of questions. listen to the answers, and retain as much as you can. We all started where you started, and you can get there as well. It's not unattainable. It's not like you have to go, sacrifice 6 years to a higher education to get where some of these people are. Now, I'll never be where Doug Tallamy is.
Don't sell yourself.
But that's a great thought. That's a great thought, Fran. And message us. I mean, I was happy to talk to you, Fran, through Messenger. Griff, I've talked to, and Andrew. I mean, you message us if you want to know something. You can connect to these people now. So please get a hold of us. We love talking about it. I mean, get in touch.
I mean, I think Tom and I have responded to just about every email that we've ever gotten, and if someone messages me,
I would say Fran has. I haven't responded to many,
but we read them. We read them, and sometimes it's not something to respond to other than to say thank you. But I try to respond to most. Like when I get messaged, I try to offer whatever advice I can, and or give any feedback I can, because we want other people to be successful. And we want other people to continue that journey that we had taken ourselves. So I think as far as industry-wide, I've never seen like a group of influencers be so accessible, I would say. And I appreciate that.
So I do have one additional final thought, and that is if you go to follow Austin on Instagram, there is Birdsong landscapes, but there's also Birdsong Landscape Design, which is based out of Rochester, New York. So not in the same state, but closer than where Sam Thayer is. So,
That's fair. All right, that's fair.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap us up for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I got to scroll to where I am on the sheet here. We hope you enjoyed listening to Austin Miller from Birdsong Landscapes. For more information,
I don't think, Austin, you have a website, do you?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll put all the social media links.
All the social media links will be in our show notes, and we appreciate you joining us for another episode of Native Plants, Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery.
Just so you know, the next episode, I rewrote that paragraph for you. One of our listeners, who is going to be my listener shout out, actually said, I think this would be a good paragraph structure for you, and it works.
Awesome.
So it will be, so you're prepared. Like don't
fantastic.
don't auto finish it. Like next time, read it. Huge thank you to the Egocentric Plastic Men for contributing our theme music. Make sure you stream or buy their songs wherever you consume music, or go out and see them live. They're playing in and around the Manayunk area. Follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, YouTube also at Pinelands Nursery. Don't forget about the question and comment line. You can call us at 215-346-6189. I will repeat that, 215-346-6189. You can call in, ask a question, or leave a comment. We'll do our best to play it on a future episode of The Buzz, and it will also enter you into any future contests that we have. So far, out of the two autographed copies of Earth and Soul by Leah Rampey, one has been claimed. The other has not been claimed. So there's still another 7 to 9 days to do that. So make sure you listen to the last episode and find out who the winners were. If one of them may have been you. I already read that. So don't forget about the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Some really interesting conversations happen in that group, and man, it was nice to see how well people responded when given the chance. To talk to someone that had legitimate questions. So I want to say thank you to everyone who responded that way.
Yeah. Fran, just a little aside from our wrap up here, but every time about this time in the episode, I glance up in horror to make sure that you push the record button and just to see it's red.
Well, because
every time I do it.
I said, because I did mention earlier, that the countdown doesn't appear unless I have.
Yeah. Okay.
Hit it. But
makes sense.
So I always, listen, I look 10 times during every episode to see what the.
Yeah, but I don't check until now. It's I get to you start reading. I'm like, I should check and see
there's no because there's no backup. Yeah. We didn't do Zoom this time, so I did hit record.
So you can buy our Native Plants Healthy Planet merch on our website www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. That's actually not true. You got to click a link that takes you to a different website, and that's where you can buy our merch. And we don't keep any of the profits from those sales. Basically, any money that is outside of direct costs for the shirts or whatever, aprons, whatever you buy, goes into a PayPal account. And then when that sum gets large enough, we say, hey, let's give it to so-and-so because they're doing really cool stuff with native plants, boots on the ground. A couple $100 is going to go a long way with them. So I haven't checked in a while, but I'm hoping we are getting close to doing another donation here. I'll probably check after we're done here. So, and then you can listen really wherever you're listening now. And we thank you for listening wherever you're listening now. Whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, wherever you're consuming your podcast, do us a favor, leave a 5-star review, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Those go a long way in supporting our message and helping more people get exposed to what we're saying here. And hopefully they're being converted to learning more about native plants. So, and open to that conversation.
Awesome.
All right. Awesome. Well, with that, thank you, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. Thank you again, everyone. Austin, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and rescheduling 5 times to do this with us.
I was not a good meeting planner.
And love to be here. Thanks, guys.
And not a lot of notice either, so we appreciate that.
No problem.
Coming up next week, we do have a Buzz episode, so make sure you tune in for that. And until then, keep it native.
Woods, wetlands, and dales grows a bounty of beauty that never fails. Our native plants, so diverse and so rare, treasures of our land beyond compare. From the ferns below, soaring oaks above, each plant has a place each family's love. Monarch caterpillars launch milk, wheat so tall, bees buzz about, sipping nectar fall. Oh, native plants, how you grace this land. In your diversity, we will take a stand. To preserve our generations of calm, and beauty and potency second to none. To protect and preserve the earth, to restore the native plant movement you just can't ignore.
Goldenrod, asters, and flowers galore. Monarch is so stunning, can't help but adore. Their colors, their fragrance, a feast for the eyes. Their value to wildlife, no need to disguise.
Native plants, how you grace this land. In your diversity, we will take a stand.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.